Hi guys and welcome back to the Bike Cave. Today we're going to dive deep into the anatomy of the C-cycling slave cylinders and also we're going to discuss a bit about their assembly. The first thing that we're going to do is to discuss a bit about the parts of the slave cylinders and how you can take everything apart and properly reassemble it. Once you have removed the slave cylinders from your bike, the only tool you need to disassemble the slave cylinders is a 2.5mm Allen wrench, and to do so, you have to unscrew the bolt at the back of each slave cylinder. Keep in mind that the slave cylinders can be also taken apart while they are still mounted on the bike, and actually this is something that you can do to clean and re-grease the slave cylinders as part of your maintenance routine. But more about the complete maintenance protocol in the next video. Having unscrewed the main screw of the slave cylinders, you can use the Allen key to push the piston out of the main body of the slave cylinder. This may require a bit of force and it can be easier when you remove the piston while the slave cylinder is still mounted on the bike. Once the piston rod is released from its socket, you can remove the piston from the main body of the slave cylinders. And that's it, you have successfully disassembled half of the slave cylinder, and once you settle with a slave cylinder version that fits your riding style, this is the most of the disassembly that you'll have to do as part of your regular maintenance routine. Next, you can disassemble the piston assembly, and to do so it's advisable to use a dedicated piston plug tool that has been designed for that purpose, or in case that you do not have one and you want to take everything apart anyway, you can also use a pick, but you have to be very careful not to damage the intricate piston plug. By disassembling the piston assembly, you get access to the spring, and so you can easily replace it in case you want to try the other option that C-cycling offers. Another reason that you may want to take apart the piston is in case that you want to upgrade by installing the titanium piston rod, or in case that you want to replace the actual piston and you want to keep the same internals. Another topic that we have to discuss is the proper installation of the O-rings that keep your slave cylinders from leaking and ensure their operation. Each C-cycling slave cylinder has at most 3 O-rings and 1 scraper seal. The most accessible O-ring is the one that is used to ensure that the bleeding port doesn't leak, and this is the easiest one to replace. The next O-ring is the one that is used to seal the moving piston, and in order to remove it you have to use a pick. But please be careful not to scratch the piston surface or the O-ring groove, as this may affect the sealing ability of the piston's O-ring. In order to replace it, you can also use a pick to pull it in its place. The third O-ring is a tricky one, and it serves the purpose of sealing the position that the countersunk M4 screw is mounted at the back of the slave cylinders. To replace this one you have to carefully use a pick, and you have to be extra cautious to make sure that it has been properly seated in place. If not properly seated, it will be damaged if you try to screw the M4 countersunk screw and your slave cylinders will leak. But if you are a bit careful, you won't have any issue with this one. Also, it has to be mentioned that once this O-ring has been properly seated, you don't have to worry that it may fly away if you remove the screw. The last of these parts is a scraper seal that is responsible for keeping most of the dirt out of the slave cylinder. This is the part with the trickiest assembly procedure, and to properly insert it to its respective groove, you are going to need a pick. This part is made out of Teflon, and so it can take a bit of bending in order to get properly seated in place. The groove that this scraper fits is a bit larger than the diameter of the scraper, and so you can start pushing the scraper at the sides of the groove, and then keep pushing it along its periphery until it fully gets into the groove. But be careful to properly align the scraper before you start pushing it into its groove. The last part of the scraper seal, that is to get into the groove, may require a bit of bending, but if you are careful enough you won't have any issue to properly insert the entire scraper into the groove without deforming it or damaging it. Once it's in place, make sure that it can move freely into its groove and it's not damaged or dented. Now that we've discussed how to take everything apart and how to replace the O-rings and the piston scraper seal, let's reverse the process and assemble everything to a perfectly working slave cylinder. Obviously, the first thing to do is to make sure that the O-ring at the back of the housing and the piston scraper are properly seated. Next, it's time to assemble the piston assembly in case that you have taken everything apart. To do so, you have to drop the piston rod into the piston, and next the spring of your choice on top of that. After that, it's time to carefully screw the piston plug using the proper special tool, or a pick in case that you don't have the dedicated special tool. But be careful, as the piston plug threads are very fine and you could cross-thread them if you are not careful enough. This is another reason that I strongly advise you to use the dedicated special tool instead of a pick, as it makes it a lot easier to properly screw the piston plug to the back of the piston. Once you are confident that the piston plug is properly screwed, you have to tighten it until it stops and becomes flush with the back of the piston. Next, and before you finish the assembly of the slave cylinder, it's time to install the piston O-ring and grease both the piston and the slave cylinder. To do so, you are strongly advised to use the special seals grease that we developed for this application, which actually is Lycolium grease enhanced with tungsten disulfide, and we're positive that is the best seals grease available. Otherwise, you can use just Lycolium grease, which is still a great option for this application. Note that you can find both greases at our shop at bikecave.eu. Once you coat both the piston and the internal of the slave cylinder with a thin layer of seals grease, and you install the O-ring of the piston, it's time to assemble the piston on the body of the slave cylinder. To do so, you just slide the piston inside the slave cylinder, and when it reaches what it feels to be its end, you need to assist a bit by using the 2.5mm Allen wrench so as to properly align it with its hole and push it to get flush with the brake pad pocket. Then the last thing that you have to do is to apply a bit of anti-seize grease on the bolt and screw this M4 countersunk bolt at the back of the slave cylinder. However, there are some times that you are trying to screw this M4 bolt, but the internal piston rod is spinning with it and you cannot get it to properly tighten and seal the slave cylinder. This may be due to a bit of grease that may have reached the end of the piston rod pocket inside the slave cylinder, or due to any other reason. To overcome it, it may require a bit of faster rotation of the Allen wrench or a bit of side push on the Allen wrench to increase the friction a little bit and rotate the screw enough to start tightening it as it's supposed to do. Once you tighten the screw, make sure that the final tightening torque is no more than 2.5 Nm, otherwise you may damage the screw and the thread of the piston rod. Now the slave cylinder is properly assembled and you are ready to install it on your bike and bleed your braking system. Note that when installing the XC-Cycling slave cylinders on your bike, you should not tighten the bolts of your brake lamps with more than 4 Nm, as this would actually cause the slave cylinders to deform and actually pinch the piston inside them. I personally go for about 3.5 Nm, and it is more than enough to ensure that my slave cylinders work as smoothly as possible and at the same time they are securely fixed to place. At this point I have to mention the dedicated manual that I've created for the XC-Cycling braking system. The manual is already up on the XC-Cycling website, and going through that you can find any detail you need to know about the XC-Cycling braking system components. I try to make the manual as comprehensive as possible, including information about each product and its assembly, as well as the maintenance of each component. Also, it has to be mentioned that the XC-Cycling braking system manual will be available only via our website in order to be dynamic and change in case that you need more information about any topic. This means that once you get a XC-Cycling product and you need a clarification about a topic discussed in the manual, you can directly contact us via email or direct message to any of our social media accounts, and we'll be happy to work with you to solve any issue and finally update the manual if necessary. I strongly believe that a good product should be also well supported via comprehensive documentation and instructional videos like this one. Also, I have more interesting videos coming up before the release of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders, and so stay tuned and be sure to subscribe in order to get notified. That's it for today guys, and I hope that this video gave you a better idea about the anatomy of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders and the proper assembly procedures. However, feel free to ask anything you want to know more about the upcoming slave cylinders, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Also, don't forget the giveaway that will be active until the final release of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders. So check out our social media accounts and the latest posts to learn more about it and how to get a chance to win a pair of XC-Cycling slave cylinders. Thanks so much for subscribing and watching, and make sure that you check out the giveaway that is currently running on Instagram. Bye!